Good afternoon. I'm Lacy Lawrence with the law firm of Akin, Gump, Strauss, Hauer, and Feld. And with me today is Sadaf Abdullah of Ericsson. Together, we have the distinct pleasure, privilege, and honor to interview DBA's next living legend, Ophelia Camiña. Ophelia is a native of San Antonio, though she spent quite a bit of time in Indiana before returning and making her way back to Texas. She's a graduate of St. Mary's College in Notre Dame with a degree in theology and philosophy. After that, she went to Notre Dame Law School, where she was an editor on Law Review, and she was the Thomas J. and Alberta White Scholar for Law and Public Policy. After that, Ophelia clerked for the Honorable Judge Jerry Buckmeyer in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Texas here in Dallas. She'll say that that's what sealed the deal for her. That really, it sparked her desire to be the trial attorney that she became today. After the clerkship, she worked for Akin Gump and then joined the Dallas office of Susman Godfrey, which is a well-known trial boutique and where she has called home for the last 32 years of her career.
Ophelia has specialized in complex commercial cases and is sought after by clients that are seeking counsel for high-stakes litigation and bet the company cases. Ophelia has received numerous honors throughout the year related to her work. I'll give you a few examples. In 2013, she was inducted into the Texas Verdicts Hall of Fame for winning the 8th largest verdict in the country in 2010 for her client Dillard's. In 2015, she was recognized by Texas Verdicts for winning the 22nd largest jury verdict in Texas in 2014. She has been recognized by a number of publications, including Texas Super Lawyers as one of the top 50 women lawyers in Texas and one of the top 100 lawyers in Texas. She is rated a best lawyer in Dallas by D Magazine and a best lawyer in America by Best Lawyers in America. Clients describe her as smart, gutsy, and tenacious, and as having the whole trial lawyer package: confidence, competitiveness, and good judgment. Ophelia is more than just an amazing lawyer, though. She stays very active in the legal community and our Dallas community. She is the director of the State Bar of Texas. She is a chair of the Dallas Bar Foundation, and she is a member of the board of directors of Parkland Health and Hospital System. She also plays a very active and important role in the mentorship and development of attorneys, especially attorneys of color and women attorneys. And we will talk about that in much more detail today, since that is how Lacy and I know Ophelia. Ophelia is also a wife and a very proud mother of twins. So with that introduction behind us, Ophelia, thank you so much for joining us today and chatting with us.
Well, I just want to say thank you for taking the initiative to be a part of this program, and I'm flattered and honored to be a part of this project.
You have called yourself in the past an accidental lawyer, and as Lacy described, you majored in theology. So how did you end up in law school?
I was a theology and philosophy major in college, and I thought that my path was to go into teaching. I was ultimately going to get a PhD and teach at the university level. And come my senior year, I had gotten into the right school for the graduate program that I wanted, but there was no scholarship money available. And PhD at that time was 8 years. And I knew that I'd be exiting with a lot of college loans with not a great opportunity to pay off those loans. So over dinner one evening with my friends, I was talking and telling them about my dilemma. And one of my girlfriends said, "Well, I'm taking the LSAT this weekend. Why don't you take it with me?" And I know it sounds so frivolous, but I had taken the GRE, so I thought, well, why not, And so I did take it, and luckily I was able to do well enough on the program, on the test, that the following year I was able to apply to law school and get a full scholarship. So that's how I ended up in law school. And I tell people that if it was not for that accident of fate, I would have never gone to law school.
So you've talked about your parents who grew up during the Depression era And you said that they really emphasize education, which I can totally relate to. I'm the daughter of 2 educators, so that was always a theme in our house as well. But you've mentioned that your parents instilled in you a belief that education is the great equalizer. Has that proven to be true in your experience as you've gone through your career?
Absolutely. And if I can kind of set the stage.
Yes.
So my father is a first-generation American, and his parents immigrated around the early 1900s from northern Spain, and they settled eventually in San Antonio. And unfortunately, my father's father, my grandfather, passed away when my father was 8 years old. And this was the Depression, and my grandmother had 8 children to raise as a widow. So as soon as my father was able, he dropped out of school to get a job to help with the family. At the same time, my mother is an immigrant. She came to the United States from central Mexico, from a small town near Morelia. And at that time, women really weren't educated beyond middle school. It wasn't expected. It wasn't an opportunity that they had. They were expected to basically work in the home after middle school. So when I came along with my parents, it was like they instilled in me this opportunity that they had lost, right? So for them, it was education that really they saw as the opportunity to open doors. And so it started out when I was young, do well in school, work hard. And then as I got older, it was not if I would go to college, it was when I would go to college. So it was very much an expectation that was subtle, but it was there. And as a result, I did go to college, and I was the first to graduate from college in my family. I went on to law school, as you know, by accident. I look back upon that, and I know that my parents, and I think I can say to this day, my father's proudest moment was when I got my degree, because he was crying. I just remember to this day that he was crying to see me walk across the stage.
Do you feel like in your career, your education kind of gives you a status that, perhaps you wouldn't have, had you not pursued your opportunities?
Well, I mean, obviously, I've been very lucky.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize that I've had opportunities, and those opportunities have given me the ability to be who I am today. And I wouldn't be here if it weren't for an education, right?
Right.
I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all the people who helped me along the way, from high school counselors all the way up through law school. I had a great mentor in law school who helped me there. So I think you look back upon it, and it's almost like a baton being passed, right? Mm-hmm. And so at any point in time, you could get off that course. But for me, that's who I am, and it's only because of education.
So when you graduated law school, at that time, you probably looked around, and there were not a lot of lawyers that looked like you. And I know that you've been a great champion for increasing diversity in the legal profession. Long before it was fashionable to do so. So can you talk a little bit about, first, why do you think diversity is important? Why is that something that we should strive through, whether we be outside counsel or in-house counsel?
Well, I truly believe that the profession should reflect society, right? And if you look at society today, we are a diverse population in this country. And I love that about this country, right? I mean, I'm the child of immigrants, and many of us are that. And so I look at that, but more importantly, the pitch I make to clients and law firms and corporations is that I haven't been in front of a jury in more than a decade that wasn't predominantly women and persons of color. And you just think about that, Yeah. I mean, and you have to believe, because I guarantee you that I have a special credibility with these people because I look like them and they can trust me, right? And it's all about, in the courtroom, it's all about credibility and trust. And so if you look like them, they're more likely to listen to you, and to reflect upon you and see themselves in you, right? So I think that's really pivotal. But I think for a bigger reason, and maybe the better reason, is because we really should reflect our society, right? And the legal profession shouldn't be something that we put on a shelf. It should be something that we embrace as a society as a whole. So that's why I think it's important.
So what advice would you give to law firms or legal departments that want to increase diversity or are focused on retaining diverse lawyers?
Well, the first piece of advice I would give is to get creative, all right? I think for a long time, and I count myself among these people who kind of looked at the issues or the problems of diversity as, one size fits all, problem and solution. I think the more I have learned about this and the more I have studied it, the more I've recognized that there are a myriad of issues, and they're not all the same. And if you have a myriad of issues, you need to come up with a variety of solutions. So for Hispanics, I think the issue is larger in terms of pipeline, all right? So there's not enough Hispanics that are graduating from high school who are going to college who then want to go to law school. And then for women, it's not a pipeline issue. I think it's more of a retention issue. Women, for whatever reason, decide that they don't want to practice anymore, or they only go part-time or something like that. So I think there's different issues, and we have to get creative about how we address those different issues. And some of it involves, going back and having more support systems for pipeline issues. Some of it is rethinking how we see and support women in the workforce, right? And so all those things we have to look at individually, because I do think that we have kind of not looked at it as what it really is, which is a variety of issues.
I want to hear a little bit about your career in the courtroom. Obviously, it's been quite successful. You have achieved some of the largest verdicts in Texas. Sadaf mentioned one of them earlier, and I want to get the number just right, $239 million on behalf of Dillard's just a few years ago. And in fact, you just finished a month-long jury trial in New York. And the only reason we're actually here today and that we're able to be here today is because that trial finally concluded. But when we talk to you, what really comes across is how much you enjoy what you do. And I think that's what I'd like to hear a little bit more about today is, why do you like being a trial lawyer?
There's really two reasons why I like being a trial lawyer. First, I love the teaching. All right. I didn't recognize that that's what it was for a long time, but now I just kind of fully embrace that role that I have in the courtroom. I mean, I get to teach the judge about what the law is. I get to teach the jury about what the facts are and to kind of look at those facts from my client's perspective. I get to thematically develop what it is that the jury's going to hear. And so for all those reasons, I love being able to do that. The other reason I love being a trial lawyer is I love being able to teach the next generation. So I have a rule. I always take at least 2 associates to trial with me, one that's very young and one that's a little bit older. And I always give them something to do in front of the jury or the judge, whatever the case may be. But I believe in really training from a very early age. And I tell these people, I was like, I still get butterflies the night before opening. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yes, I do, and they're like, okay, so it's all right for me to have butterflies. And I'm like, yes, it's okay, and if you don't, you should be worried, But I love that. I also, I love the drama of the courtroom, right? There's there's the ability to be a little dramatic. There's the ability to, you know, bring some drama or theater into the courtroom to keep the jury entertained. So I do love that, and I think the combination is something that really works for me, and so I thrive on that. What can I say?
Okay, I love to know that you thrive on the drama. I hope your associates know how lucky they are to have those opportunities. It's harder and harder, I think, as we all know, to come up with opportunities in the courtroom, and in particular in a jury trial. And so I applaud you for making those opportunities available. Now, I mentioned earlier that you've been with Susman Godfrey for 30 plus years, you know, which is kind of unusual. We don't see folks stick with law firms quite as long. And I'm curious, did you ever at any point in your career consider a different path, going in-house, becoming a judge, doing something just totally different?
I didn't, but before I tell you why I didn't, I wanna talk about why I didn't. And it starts all the way back with my time at Akin Gump. So I started my career in the litigation section at Akin Gump, and I had the privilege of working with what I consider to be some of the best trial lawyers in Dallas. Jack Hauer, Mike Lynn, Tom Melsheimer, and there were women too. I mean, we had Maureen Armour, and there were just countless women, Carol Stevenson. So I had this amazing opportunity to learn very early in my career, and they gave me that opportunity. I soon found out that the boutique model was better for me, and so I went from Akin Gump to Susman Godfrey. And I have had opportunities along the way to think about exiting and going to be a judge or going in-house, but I think that what ultimately kept me where I am is it just works for me. You know, I enjoy what I do. I enjoy having my own practice because it's my own practice. You know, I get to say no when I want to say no. I get to say yes when I want to say yes. And I have my partners to thank for that because they allow me that freedom. And one other thing I know about myself is I often speak my mind, and I'll speak frankly. And what I love about my partners is they accept what I say, and sometimes even when I disagree with them. And so I think that home that I have built for the last 30 some odd years works for me. And so as a result, it's kind of like one of those, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I've just relished in the opportunity to do what I do, and I love my partners.
Well, I completely get that, and they clearly accept and expect what they're going to get from you. I should note, and I should have noted this in the introduction, that you've served in all sorts of positions within your firm, leadership positions, including the executive committee that's tasked with running the firm. So so clearly the value goes both ways. You valuing your partners, but your partners valuing you.
Yeah.
In thinking about you as the trial attorney that you are, you've had so much success, but I think something really unique about you is your style. You're not maybe what some folks expect. You're not aggressive. You're not loud. You're not over the top. In fact, I'd only met you through Zoom before now, and you're not. You're just this tiny little woman, and it's just not what folks expect. But clearly, it has worked for you. Your style has really worked for you. And so, what I'd first like to know is how did you come up with what your style would be in the courtroom? So
let me first say what my style is, and then I'll tell you how I got there. And so again, I have kind of formulated this image of being a teacher, right? So a lot of the cases that I work on are technology related. And as you know, I don't have any technology background. So, what I always tell people is if you can teach it to me, all right, then I can learn to break it down and teach it to somebody else. And I've used that. So I love that about me, and I love that I can reformulate it and teach it out. The other thing that I think is part of my style is I never oversell. You know, if I am not 110% confident that I can deliver on something, you know, you hear people in opening say, you know, you will hear that X and Y, you know, and I never say that unless I know I have that, right? Because I don't know, you know, what if I get to closing and I don't, you know. So I never oversell. I always try to be straightforward with the jury. And so what that gives me ultimately is my style, which is a trusted teacher, all right? So by the time I get to closing, you know, hopefully they have learned that they can trust me and that I can then present to them the dispute and how to solve the dispute, you know, how to answer those questions. And so that really is the process by which I go. And I'm not, you know, loud or aggressive in the courtroom. In fact, I will say that we interviewed the jury in this trial that we just finished in New York. And one thing that they said consistently was they did not like the male lawyers because they were too aggressive.
I've heard that too.
They were
feedback.
too aggressive. And they said, we really liked you, you know, because I wasn't too aggressive, because they don't like that. They don't like the aggression, right? Because they don't understand the dynamics behind the scenes, right? They just see what's going on in the courtroom. So they don't know that you pulled something last night and I'm angry about that. They don't know anything about that. So the point is, I think they expect people to be professionals. Mm-hmm. And by and large, they don't want to see that aggression in the courtroom. Every once in a while, you have to kind of turn it up a notch, but that doesn't mean you have to shout and scream, you know. Yeah. So that's my style.
Okay, that's great. And I think what folks would really like to hear, you know, we probably have some young, you know, aspiring trial lawyers watching, and I think they would appreciate any advice you have on how you find your voice, whether you're speaking to a judge, to a jury, to the boardroom, to a client, whatever it happens to be. How do you find that style and that voice?
Well, it's a process, and I think it starts by watching. And that's how I developed my style is I watched accomplished lawyers. You know, I had a full year of watching accomplished lawyers when I was clerking for Jerry Buckmeyer. And then after that, I've watched lawyers in the courtroom. If I know that there's a jury trial going on or even a bench trial going on and some famous lawyer, a really seasoned lawyer, when I was younger, I'd hear there at the courthouse, I'd run down, you know, and watch for a couple hours, because you watch them and you say, I think I could see myself doing that. At the same time, you could say, no, I don't think I could do that, you know. And what you do is you start thinking to yourself, how you watch how they move, you watch how they talk, you watch how they use their voice, right? And you start learning what works for you. And there is no one style that is, you know, the winning style. I think a lot of people think, oh, I have to be like that in order to be a successful trial lawyer. It's not that at all. I think it's really all about being authentic and being yourself, ultimately. And I know that sounds a bit cliche, but I do believe that ultimately, if you are authentic, that the jury's or the judge is going to pick up on that and you're going to come across credibly. But to find like what works for you, like we were talking about drama, you know, how much drama is okay, you know, what kinds of things can you say that's okay, right? You have to find that for you, what's comfortable for you. And what's comfortable for me may not be comfortable for you and vice versa, right? So it's all about your unique individual skills and what you feel comfortable at.
I think that is all so great, and I'm with you. I used to do that too. I do it a little less often, where I go to the courthouse and just watch lawyers to see what they're doing and how they practice and the arguments they're making and what was effective and what was not. I will say one of the benefits of all the Zoom hearings was I found myself tuning in to more hearings that way. So I didn't have to pick up myself and walk over to the courthouse. I could just flip on the switch and watch what was going on in, say, Judge Jones's courtroom down in Houston all day long, and just watch lawyers and watch the court and see what was going on. So I think that's great advice, and I hope it really resonates with folks to say, you know what, it's worth it. I can put this matter aside and I can go sit and watch court for a little bit. So that's very, very helpful advice.
Well, and I think it's kind of like many other things that we do, right? You don't like just become great at something by just doing it. Yeah, you have to do it, but it's also good to watch, you know, and to see how other people perform. And that kind of hones your skills at each level.
Well, it gives you ideas of what tricks to put in your bag, right?
Exactly.
Oh, I didn't think of doing it that way. Next time I'll try that when the court pushes back on me or whatever it happens to be.
Sure. And I have, if I can, I'll give you one example. So I saw this one time where a lawyer was using just a regular big old pad in the courtroom to write things down. And I had this case a few years ago, and because many of the witnesses were outside the jurisdiction, we had a lot of depositions to play. Well, of course, you know, you try to keep your depositions short and crisp. So after the second day of trial, I kind of got the feeling that the jury really wasn't following along, right? So the general counsel was the corporate representative, and he was sitting in the courtroom. And he had testified as the corporate representative. So I did something a little unorthodox. I called him to the stand. And I said to him, well, you were here we played the deposition of X. And you recall he said XYZ. And so I wrote on the pad XYZ. And then I said, you were also here when we played the deposition of such and such. And you remember he said ABC. And so I wrote down on the pad ABC. Well, I went through the whole thing, all of the depositions that had been played, and I basically reiterated the important parts of what they had to say. and you could see the jury was mesmerized.
Yeah, light bulbs.
It was like light bulbs, but it was also like, oh, that's what that meant, you know?
Yeah.
So it was a way to kind of put it together.
And that to me also sounds like flexibility, right?
Right.
The ability to kind of change your plan and change what you're about to do based on feedback that you're getting from their faces.
Feedback and also just gut, you know, I tell people if you do it enough, and this is where experience comes in, you get a gut feeling that you need to like reinforce, right? And they say that to educate, you need to use different formats, you know, you need to listen, you need to read, you need to see pictures. This is a way for me to kind of reorient them, to teach them a second time what they'd already heard, but they didn't understand, right?
Yeah.
Because it was almost too abridged. And this was a way to do it. And the fact that it was convenient that the general counsel was in the room, it just happened. But Judge Boyle let me do it. And so it turned out to be a great idea. Because I think in the end it really solidified for them what they'd been hearing.
Well, that's great, and all because you took that opportunity to watch somebody else in court one day, and it inspired you in a future case. So
right, absolutely.
That's wonderful. Well, I would love to talk about your courtroom successes and war stories all day long, quite honestly. But you know, we should shift to another really important topic, which is mentorship. And this is something that I know is near and dear to your heart, and it's something you've put a lot of time and effort into, and in particular, the mentorship of young women within this profession. In fact, we've mentioned it earlier, but that's how Sadaf and I came to know you. Is we were classmates in the recent DBA We Lead class, and just had the opportunity, whether through mentorship circles or other opportunities within that program, really get to know you and get to learn about who you are and what all you've contributed to the legal profession, which has really just been great. So clearly a passion of yours, clearly something you're really, really invested in. And I think what we'd like to hear first is why did you start to get involved in these mentorship and other types of initiatives?
Well, it's a bit of a long story, but it starts about 15 years ago. And I was appointed to a committee. It was called, had a fancy name, but it was basically a task force on the advancement of women in the profession. And it was the State Bar of Texas task force. And we met for like monthly for a year. And the idea was to study the issues that were confronting some of the same issues we talk about today. Why aren't there more women partners? Why, are there no more women in management roles? So we started studying that, and we delivered this report, big thick report, and everybody applauded it, and decided that we would make some changes. But it was a macro view, right? And so it started me thinking about, well, that's great. And now I have this wealth of knowledge about the issues, but what can I do on a micro level, right? So that kind of started me thinking, like, what is it that holds us back, right? And I came to the conclusion then, and I still believe this today, that there's actually two issues, right? The first issue is retention. We have to have women stay in the profession. And we have to make it, we have to come up with creative solutions to keep them in the profession. And the second thing is we need to have women genuinely rise and accrue power in leadership roles, whether it's in corporations or law firms or whatever, but we need women in leadership. And so I started thinking, like, what can I do to help in that? And so that started me on the path of coming up with the idea, which eventually formed into Act 3. So that was kind of where I started.
So tell us a little bit more about Act 3. What exactly is it, and what inspired you to go down that path?
So Act 3 is a group of women. They're all fairly senior women, seasoned, and they each come from a different practice area. So tax, real estate, litigation, different types of litigation, but all from different areas. And that was intentional because my idea for Act 3 was to bring these women together, to meet monthly, and to develop relationships. But I was very candid about what I wanted them to do, which is to share clients, share matters. If you have a conflict, share it with one of these other people, okay? Think of these women first, right? And promote each other. I said, I want you to be the cheerleaders for each other, and support each other, and give each other advice. And I'm happy to say that today we still meet. We still have this group together, and we have launched general counsel, we have launched judges, we have launched managing partners, and it's still a very supportive group. And and I don't mean to say that's just the ups. I mean, there's the downs too, and you kind of have to be the advisors and cheerleaders, right? And that's really what Act 3 is about, and I'm really very proud of my sisters.
That's great. So Act 3, it sounds like you were focused more on the senior women lawyers, whereas We Lead is more sort of mid-level to younger lawyers. And so tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the We Lead program.
Yeah, so again, Act 3 is kind of the second part. How do you get women to get into management positions, into leadership roles? So the first issue I talked about, which is retention, right? How do you keep women in the profession? So I was having lunch with Michael Hurst, and this was right before he became president of the Dallas Bar Association. And I was telling him about my concern about women and retention, right? And I said, we really need to do something. And he said, I've been thinking the same thing. And so he said, I've been thinking about this program to really, gear towards women. And I'm like, well, we need to really focus on the younger women, right? Because that's the sweet spot in terms of retention, right about the time where they're 7 to 8 years in the practice. And that's when things get rough. I mean, you've got a lot of pressures on you. You've got clients that are calling on you. Often you have a family. I mean, you've got a lot of demands. And so I said, that's when we really need to define a support group, to give them additional tools. And so Michael came up with this idea for We Lead, formed this committee. I was asked to serve on the committee, and I wrote the curriculum for the first year. And then after that, I've been executive director of the program since then. And I'm very proud to say that we now have, with your class, launched 4 classes of women who are just smashing records. I'm so proud of all of these women who are, making partner, who are, advancing in leadership roles in their jobs and in corporations. They're starting their own law firms. They're doing it all. And it's just amazing to watch. And I'm just so humbled by the opportunity to be a part of that.
Well, I think I can speak for our entire class, probably all of the We Leaders thus far, to really, really thank you for that brainchild, because it has been wildly successful, as you said. And, I think the relationships we've developed are going to last us a lifetime. It's been so educational. I feel like I've grown so much. And one of my favorite things is I feel like I now have like a cadre of mentors to call on, not just, mentor women that are older, but also my peer mentors. So, if anyone is thinking of applying, definitely recommend the program, and hopefully it'll continue to be successful.
I hope so. I think they certainly have a great alumni group, and I think it's a wonderful program. And the more that we can touch, the more women we can touch and empower, I think the sooner we will see that fruition in the profession, right?
Well, I'll second the recommendation that Sadaf just gave. We're both recent graduates, and huge value, huge benefit. And I think one of the reasons a lot of women joined was just building a network, making more connections within Dallas. And I think we graduated with just a wonderful, wonderful group. And I think Sadaf's absolutely right. Just being able to pick up the phone and call any one of these impressive women in Dallas is just a huge benefit, in addition to the wonderful curriculum and everything else that the program brought with it. You've touched on this, and I think the comments from Sadaf and I both touch on this as well. But why is it so important to you to be invested in these types of initiatives?
I go back to thinking about Madeleine Albright and her comment about, there's a special place in hell for women that don't help other women. I have been very lucky in my career. How did this little girl get from San Antonio to where I am today? But there's so many people along the way, men, women, all sorts of people that I would love to thank, but I could never pay back. So I see it as my responsibility to pay it forward, right? And so for me, it's important because I look at this as, the opportunity that I have and that I want to give to the next generation. And that's why it just gives me so much pride to see, We Lead and others just thriving, because that's what, for me, it's all about, right? I mean, it's for the next generation. And so it just gives me a lot of joy to see that.
Well, I want to share a compliment with you from another one of the living legends. The Honorable Judge Maricela Moore was interviewed, maybe a few months ago now. And when talking about mentorship and the importance of mentorship, she referenced you. She said, that you have been somebody that's been such a key part of helping her, guiding her in her career. She says, and I think we've both experienced this, that you give great advice, but it's not just that. You ask the right questions. You really have helped guide her, and she was quite effusive in her praise during her interview of you, and that made us want to ask you, what's your advice for the other mentors out there? How can they be successful? How can they best mentor the folks that they're looking after?
So, I go back to what I said before about helping others. I think fundamentally, we all have to help each other, right? And I see that as one of the important things that I do professionally, personally. And if anybody ever calls me and says they need help, I'm never going to say no. That's just who I am. So, I know it's out there now, but that's just who I am. The second thing I think is important to recognize as a mentor is to look at it as not a chore, but as a responsibility of investing in the future. Because ultimately, whatever we leave behind is a legacy, right? And that legacy is to grow, right? And to flourish. And for me, my legacy, I hope, is to advance the cause of persons of color and women in this profession. And so I look at it as investing in the next generation. And if you look at it from that perspective, you say to yourself, what would I have wanted to know if I was talking to my younger self, right? So, maybe my advice would be different than somebody else's advice, because I don't think there's any one list of perfect attributes of a mentor, because I have certain strengths, somebody else has certain other strengths. And, but I think that if we give it from ourselves and from our heart, right? And you look at it as a genuine desire to help other people, then I think that's really what makes a perfect mentor, is looking at it from, I want to help other people and I want to invest in their future and the general future altogether, right?
Well, that's wonderful and so true. And I think the point about everybody is going to be a little bit different when it comes to how they mentor. But I think your points are really well taken. I would like to give a shout out to the younger attorneys that are watching here, maybe the ones that are in need of some mentorship and they don't exactly know how to go about finding it. Any advice to them?
Well, it's kind of the converse. So I think you have to find somebody who is willing to invest in you. And I will say that it doesn't have to be just one person, and it doesn't just have to be one person throughout your career. It can be many people. I mean, I've had many mentors over my career, and I think that they serve different roles in different ways. And so I think finding people who are willing to invest in you is the start. I think you have to be upfront with them about what you want. Right? Maybe it's just advice periodically. Maybe it's something more consistent. Maybe it's, you want to know about career changes. But you have to kind of communicate what it is your expectation is and make sure you get a common agreement about that. And then I think ultimately, with mentees, you have to be willing to hear what the answers are. And sometimes it's not the answer you want, okay? And you have to accept that, because ultimately, if you want a true mentor, they need to be candid with you, right? And sometimes it's, the thumbs up, it's great, do that.
Yes.
Sometimes it's like, oh, I'm not so sure,
It's the kick in the pants.
It's the kick in the pants sometimes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think some of the best advice I've gotten, and it's really along the lines of what you've just said, is mentorship is a two-way street. And so, the mentor can certainly be there and dispense that advice and help you out. But the mentee also needs to put in that effort, needs to guide their own career, needs to seek out that advice, needs to seek out those relationships and put that effort in as well.
Right.
So that's all very helpful.
So kind of along the lines of mentorship, what advice would you give to your younger self? Like, is there a lesson that you've learned throughout your career that if you could, dial back the years and just tell yourself, what would that be?
Well, there's a lot of advice I wish I could go back and redo. Can I get a redo? But I think, one thing that if I had to give myself, my younger self, some advice and a lesson that I learned the hard way is you're evaluated based on results, not activity, right? And what I mean by that is, especially women, but we think that working hard and doing great work is success, right? And I don't want to undersell that, because I don't think that you can be a great lawyer without doing great work. So what I always say is that great work and hard work is the foundation, okay, for being a great lawyer. But it doesn't stop there. You have to build on top of that, right? And so what do you build on top of that? You have to have the results, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to, if you're in a private law firm, that means bringing in the clients and bringing in the dollars. If you're in a corporation, that's sometimes saving the dollars and getting the goals, right? So wherever you're at, you have to determine what are the results, okay? And yes, I have to work hard, but I have to get the result, right? You have to close the deal. And then I think, and this is the part that I think is often hard for women, you have to be public about your results, right? You have to shout it out in the hallways, right, and make sure to publicize what you did and let other people know, what your success, because ultimately you're going to be judged for the result, but they have to know about the result, right? And so you're going to get hired on the next deal or the next case or whatever because they heard about that. And if you don't publicize it, then people won't be, they won't know about it, right? And so many people today, they talk, general counsel will talk to general counsel. Do you know so-and-so? Have you ever worked with them? And so if they had a great result with you and they were public or they heard about that great result even, that is something that helps contribute to your success, right? And ultimately, again, I get back to my common theme, promoting women is about getting them successful, getting them in leadership roles, and advancing the profession altogether, right?
Well, Ophelia, for someone like me, a woman of color attorney, you are an amazing role model. But I really, truly think that, based on everything we've talked about today, that you really are a role model for anyone out there in the legal community, and particularly trial lawyers and, attorneys that really want to do well in commercial litigation, because obviously you've proven that you've done that. So once again, thank you very much for taking the time, and we really value your words, and we'll definitely be in touch and see you around.
Well, I'm honored and privileged to be here today, and I'm so proud of the both of you taking this initiative and being a part of this wonderful project, and so thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Thank you.